quiet home, pregnant mother. One ordinary evening, and then she vanished without a trace. On May 5, 1999, 34-year-old Debbie Griggs disappeared from her home in Deal, England. Her sudden disappearance would uncover a mystery that shocked the nation and ultimately led to a decades-long search for the truth.
Stay with us until the very end, because every clue matters. Before we begin, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest true crime stories.
At 7:38 p.m. on Wednesday, May 5th, 1999, Debbie Griggs made what seemed like an ordinary phone call. She called her sister-in-law, Lisa, to confirm that she would drive her to their regular mother and toddler group the following morning. It was a simple conversation, just two family members making plans for the next day. They said goodbye, hung up the phone, and expected to see each other in the morning. That morning never came. Debbie never made that drive. At just 34 years old, Debbie was a devoted mother raising 3 young boys, ages 6, 4, and just 18 months. She was also a trained nurse, someone who had dedicated her career to caring for others long before she became a wife and mother. And there was one more reason she was looking toward the future. She was pregnant with her 4th child. But sometime that night, inside the family home she shared with her husband, Andrew Griggs, in Deal, Kent, Debbie was brutally murdered. Then, she simply disappeared. For the next 23 years, no one knew where her body was. During all that time, Andrew Griggs repeated the same story. He told the same lie to investigators, the media, a jury, and eventually from inside a prison cell after being convicted of her murder. Even after justice caught up with him, he made one final, disturbing attempt to rewrite history. This is the complete story of Debbie Griggs. Debbie Griggs grew up in the quiet seaside town of Deal on England's southeastern coast. It was the kind of close-knit community where families stayed for generations, neighbors knew one another by name, and lifelong friendships were common. From an early age, Debbie knew she wanted to help people. She trained as a nurse and worked in residential care homes before starting her own family. That detail may seem small, but it reveals something important about who Debbie truly was. Kindness wasn't simply expected of her. It was a choice she made. Long before she became a wife or a mother, she had already built her life around compassion, responsibility, and serving others. Everyone who knew Debbie described the same woman. She was warm, loyal, generous, and fiercely independent. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind when something felt wrong. Teachers from her oldest son's school later testified about the kind of mother she was, and during sentencing, the judge described Debbie with a phrase that would become especially meaningful. She was no shrinking violet. In other words, Debbie wasn't timid. She noticed things. She asked questions. She stood up for herself. That mattered, because for more than 2 decades, the man responsible for her death tried to convince the world she had been unstable, fragile, and emotionally broken. The evidence would ultimately prove the opposite. Andrew John Griggs was born on August 26, 1962, and, like Debbie, he grew up in Deal. As an adult, he built his identity around hard work, the sea, and the family business. He had worked as a deep-sea fisherman and was an experienced sailor with extensive knowledge of the Kent coastline. His family also owned a frozen food business known as Griggs Freezer Center, which had operated locally for nearly 30 years. When Andrew and Debbie married in 1990, the business became part of their shared life. To outsiders, Andrew appeared to be exactly what many people expected: a hardworking businessman, respected in the community, and a capable father. Even Debbie acknowledged that he could be a good father when he chose to be. But appearances can be deceiving. According to the court, Debbie carried almost the entire burden of family life. She cared for the children. She managed the household. She handled the emotional responsibilities of raising a growing family. Meanwhile, Andrew spent many evenings away from home, focused on his own interests, because looking like a devoted father isn't the same as actually being one. There were also warning signs Debbie didn't discover until after they were married. Before the wedding, Andrew had experienced the collapse of a business venture severe enough to require treatment from community psychiatric services. The judge later noted that Debbie appeared to learn about this only after saying, "I do." It suggested a troubling pattern. Andrew carefully controlled the image he presented to others and revealed only the information that benefited him. By 1997, Debbie and Andrew had 3 sons. Their youngest had been born just months earlier, meaning Debbie was raising children who were 6 years old, 4 years old, and only 18 months old. On top of that, she worked part-time in the family business while running the household. In a sworn statement she later prepared, Debbie described her marriage in painfully honest terms. She said Andrew treated their shared finances as though everything belonged solely to him. He limited her independence. He consistently put his own needs ahead of hers. And whenever she challenged him, he dismissed her as crazy or mentally ill. Debbie had experienced postpartum depression after the births of her first 2 children. She sought professional treatment, followed medical advice, and successfully recovered. She stopped taking antidepressants in March 1995, 4 years before her death. That timeline would later become critically important, because Andrew would use her past mental health history as a weapon, attempting to convince investigators that Debbie had voluntarily disappeared. The court found no evidence that she was suffering from clinical depression at the time she vanished. Then, investigators uncovered something even more disturbing. From the late summer of 1998 through the spring of 1999, Andrew was involved in a sexual relationship with a teenage girl. Because of legal reporting restrictions, her identity has never been released. The court determined she was only 14 or 15 years old. The judge concluded that Andrew had groomed the teenager, taken advantage of her emotional vulnerability, and become completely obsessed with her. Debbie began to suspect the truth. She confronted both Andrew and the girl. Both denied everything. But the affair continued. According to the judge, Andrew even flirted openly with the teenager in front of Debbie, humiliating his pregnant wife inside their own home. Then, in February 1999, Debbie shared what should have been joyful news. She told Andrew she was pregnant again. Instead of celebrating, he accused her of carrying another man's child. The accusation was completely false. Ironically, Andrew was the one having the affair. He pressured Debbie to end the pregnancy. He even questioned whether their third son was biologically his. Imagine Debbie's reality. She was pregnant, caring for 3 young children, trying to hold her family together, while the man she trusted most rejected both her and their unborn baby. But Debbie wasn't giving up. She wasn't helpless. And she wasn't willing to let Andrew control everything. The family business was jointly owned, and company checks required signatures from both partners. Realizing the importance of that, Debbie took possession of the business checkbooks. She privately described them to people she trusted as her ace in the hole. She understood her legal rights. She knew half of the business belonged to her. She wasn't making emotional threats. She was protecting herself from being financially pushed aside. As the final week of Debbie's life unfolded, tensions inside the Griggs household reached a breaking point. Neither Debbie nor Andrew could have known that everything was about to change forever. As the pressure inside the Griggs household continued to build, everything reached a breaking point. On Tuesday, May 4th, 1999, Andrew took the teenage girl to a swimming pool in Folkestone, choosing a town outside of Deal where they were less likely to be recognized. Later that afternoon, shortly after she returned home from school, he called her again. Then, on Wednesday, May 5th, another critical event unfolded. Andrew's parents signed a bank guarantee that allowed him to open a new business account solely in his own name. At the same time, the joint business account, an account that required both Andrew's and Debbie's signatures, was being closed. Without Debbie knowing it, the financial protection she believed she still had was quietly disappearing. Those business checkbooks she had once called her ace in the hole were suddenly worthless. Investigators would later discover that Andrew had already begun expressing his anger to others. A business associate, Peter Monks, told the court that Andrew had repeatedly complained about Debbie demanding half of everything if they separated. More disturbingly, Andrew had spoken about wanting his wife dead. The trial judge later made it clear. This wasn't an offhand comment made in frustration. It reflected what Andrew genuinely wanted. By the evening of May 5th, 2 separate problems were closing in on Andrew at exactly the same time: his secret relationship with the teenage girl and the growing financial dispute with Debbie. The judge concluded that the final confrontation inside the Griggs home most likely happened after Debbie realized 2 devastating truths. Andrew was still involved with the teenage girl, and he had secretly stripped away her financial security. At 7:38 p.m., Debbie called her sister-in-law, Lisa Vickers, to confirm their plans for the following morning. She sounded completely normal. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't preparing to leave. She was simply planning for tomorrow. Less than 4 hours later, at 11:20 p.m., Andrew made another phone call. This time, he called his friend Lloyd Dunley, the man he regularly traveled with to London's Billingsgate Fish Market. Andrew canceled their usual overnight trip. He gave Lloyd an excuse. But he never mentioned Debbie. According to the judge, everything that mattered had already happened between those two phone calls. By 1120 that night, Debbie Griggs was already dead. She had been killed inside the home where her 3 young sons were asleep, the very place where she should have been safest. In the early hours of May 6th, neighbors noticed something unusual. Several witnesses saw Debbie's white Peugeot moving during the night. One neighbor watched the vehicle reverse out of the driveway at around 2:00 a.m. Another saw it leave again, close to 4:00 a.m. The court concluded that Andrew had made 2 separate trips. The first was to dispose of Debbie's body, leaving his 3 sleeping sons alone inside the house. The second was to abandon Debbie's car in a location that was close enough for him to walk home, but far enough away to delay its discovery. He left it on a quiet residential street known as the Shrubbery, a road he knew well from his delivery route. The walk back home took about 15 minutes. When daylight arrived on May 6th, Andrew began telling a very different story. He claimed Debbie had stormed out after an argument. According to him, she had said something about making him see what it was like to care for the children on his own before driving away. But there was something investigators found deeply suspicious. Andrew never contacted Debbie's parents. The trial judge later described that as one of the most revealing details in the entire case. If someone truly believed their spouse had left after a heated argument, the first instinct would be to call family members to ask if they had seen or heard from them. Andrew didn't. Instead, his mother arrived at the house. So did the teenage girl. Andrew asked her to wash his laundry, specifically the black jeans he had been wearing the previous night. Only after those clothes had been washed did he report Debbie missing to the police. When officers arrived, Andrew appeared calm and composed. He immediately began shaping the narrative. He told investigators that Debbie had suffered from postpartum depression. He described her as overwhelmed by caring for 3 young children while pregnant with a 4th. He even claimed she had disappeared before and later returned home. The picture he painted was clear: a struggling woman who had finally reached her breaking point. But according to the evidence presented in court, it wasn't the truth. It was a carefully constructed story designed to divert suspicion from himself. Nearly a week later, Debbie's white Peugeot was found abandoned on the Shrubbery. Forensic investigators made 2 discoveries that would become central to the prosecution's case. First, the protective lining inside the trunk had been removed. Investigators believed it had almost certainly been taken out to destroy forensic evidence. But whoever removed it made one crucial mistake. They missed a small smear of Debbie's blood on the inside panel of the trunk. That single stain survived. The judge later described it as one of the most important pieces of circumstantial evidence in the entire investigation. Even so, in 1999, the evidence wasn't enough. There was no body, no confession, and Andrew never changed his story. Without stronger evidence, prosecutors couldn't move forward. Debbie was officially listed as a missing person. The investigation slowly lost momentum. Meanwhile, Andrew remained the primary suspect and continued raising their 3 sons in Deal. As the years passed, Andrew didn't live like a man burdened by guilt. He rebuilt his life. He eventually remarried a woman who had 3 children of her own, and together they moved to Dorset. To everyone around him, Andrew portrayed himself as a devoted father whose troubled wife had abandoned the family. His sons grew up believing the story he had created, that their mother had chosen to leave, that she had walked away from them. They had no grave to visit, no answers, no opportunity to truly grieve. In 2007, 8 years after Debbie disappeared, Andrew successfully applied to have her legally declared dead. That legal declaration allowed him to remarry. The lie that began on the night Debbie died had now become part of the official record. But Debbie's family never stopped fighting. Every year, around the anniversary of her disappearance, her mother appealed to the media. She continued urging police to reopen the investigation, and she never stopped saying the same thing. Debbie would never leave her children. Tragically, Debbie's mother passed away in January 2019, just weeks before Andrew was finally arrested and charged with murder. She came heartbreakingly close to seeing justice, but she never lived to witness it. Following a major cold case review, Kent police charged Andrew Griggs with Debbie's murder in 2019. He pleaded not guilty. The prosecution's case relied entirely on circumstantial evidence. There was still no body. Prosecutors argued Andrew had two powerful motives. The first was financial. A divorce would have entitled Debbie to half of the family business. The second was far darker. He feared Debbie would expose his sexual relationship with a 14-year-old girl, the blood found inside the trunk, the missing trunk lining, Andrew's inconsistent statements, his suspicious behavior, and Peter Monk's testimony. Together, they formed a compelling picture of guilt. The jury also learned who Debbie really was: a devoted nurse, a loving mother, a woman who was pregnant with her fourth child. They heard about the phone call she made at 7:38 p.m., calmly arranging plans for the following morning. And they were asked one simple question: would a woman like Debbie Griggs, a mother so devoted to her children, really choose to disappear forever without ever contacting them again? The evidence pointed to only one answer. On October 28th, 2019, after carefully considering the evidence, the jury returned its verdict. Andrew John Griggs was found guilty of murder. 2 days later, on October 30th, 2019, Andrew Griggs was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 20 years before he could even be considered for parole. The judge pointed to two especially heartbreaking factors that made the crime even more severe. Debbie had been pregnant when she was murdered, and after taking her life, Andrew hid her body so successfully that her family was denied the chance to bury her, mourn her properly, or even know where she was. During sentencing, the judge made one thing unmistakably clear. If Andrew had shown genuine remorse, he would have admitted what he'd done and revealed where Debbie's body was. He did neither. In the judge's words, there was no genuine remorse at all. For 3 more years, Debbie's family continued searching for answers. Then, in October 2022, 23 years after Debbie disappeared, investigators finally uncovered the truth. Specialist officers excavated the backyard of Andrew's former home in St. Leonard's, Dorset. Beneath a concrete foundation that had once supported a lean-to shed, they discovered a blue tarpaulin wrapped around a barrel-shaped container. Inside were human remains. Forensic testing confirmed the unimaginable. They belonged to Debbie Griggs. But the discovery didn't end there. Investigators also found a pillowcase, a duvet, men's and women's clothing, and one crucial piece of evidence: the missing lining from the trunk of Debbie's Peugeot, the very lining Andrew had removed back in 1999 in an attempt to erase forensic evidence. He hadn't destroyed it. He buried it with Debbie. Then he poured concrete over the grave and built a shed on top. For more than 2 decades, he had literally buried the truth beneath his own backyard. The discovery wasn't the result of a guilty conscience. Andrew never voluntarily confessed. Instead, his own deception finally caught up with him. While serving his life sentence, Andrew contacted one of his sons with a shocking request. He instructed him to travel to Dorset, dig up Debbie's remains, cut off some of her hair, take it to another country, and mail a letter pretending to be from Debbie herself. The fake letter would claim she was still alive and had chosen to disappear all those years earlier. It was a desperate attempt to overturn his murder conviction. But instead of carrying out the plan, the information reached the police. Investigators searched the property, and after 23 years, Debbie finally came home. On June 2nd, 2025, Andrew Griggs stood before a judge once again. This time, he pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice. The sentencing judge described him as conniving, devious, and narcissistic. Even after admitting the offense, the court found no evidence of genuine remorse. Instead, the judge said Andrew had simply made one last desperate attempt to escape responsibility for a murder he had already been convicted of committing. He received an additional 3-year prison sentence to be served consecutively. His earliest possible release date is now 2041. The Debbie Griggs case has become one of the most significant examples in British legal history of what's known as a no-body murder conviction. A murder conviction secured even though the victim's body had not yet been found. Cases like this are exceptionally rare. Without a body, prosecutors must build their case piece by piece. Every fact, every inconsistency, every motive, every forensic clue must point in exactly the same direction. In Debbie's case, one tiny smear of blood inside the trunk of her car became the foundation of that evidence. By itself, it wasn't enough. But combined with the missing trunk lining, Andrew's contradictory stories, his financial motives, his affair with a teenage girl, and the testimony of witnesses, the picture became impossible to ignore. When Andrew appealed his conviction in 2022, his legal team argued that evidence about the teenage girl should never have been presented to the jury. The Court of Appeal disagreed. The judges ruled that the relationship explained Andrew's motive, the collapse of his marriage, and everything he stood to lose. Later that same year, the discovery of Debbie's body, and the missing trunk lining buried beside her, confirmed what the jury had already concluded years earlier. Justice had been based on the truth all along. Perhaps the most disturbing part of this case wasn't just the murder. It was the extraordinary level of deception that followed. For more than 20 years, Andrew carefully controlled the story everyone believed. The morning after killing his pregnant wife, he appeared calm. He convinced people he was the abandoned husband. He persuaded the courts to legally declare Debbie dead. He remarried. He built an entirely new life. And throughout it all, he protected one thing above everything else: his own version of events. Investigators and judges later described a pattern of sustained manipulation. Andrew even weaponized Debbie's past struggles with postpartum depression, something she had openly acknowledged, treated professionally, and recovered from. He twisted that history into a false explanation for her disappearance. Her understandable anger over betrayal became evidence of instability. Her pain became his alibi. Sadly, experts say this is a common pattern in domestic homicide cases where offenders attempt to portray victims as people who simply chose to walk away. Then there are the children. On the night Debbie was murdered, her 3 young sons, just 6 years old, 4 years old, and 18 months old, were asleep in the same house. While they slept, their father drove away to dispose of their mother's body. For 23 years, those boys grew up believing the story Andrew had invented, that their mother couldn't cope, that she had abandoned them. Imagine carrying that belief throughout your childhood, believing the person who loved you most had simply chosen not to come back. Then came perhaps the cruelest betrayal of all. From prison, Andrew asked one of those same sons to help dig up Debbie's remains and fake evidence that she was still alive. The son refused. Instead, the truth finally reached the police. Debbie Griggs wasn't only the victim of one horrific night. She was the victim of a 23-year campaign of lies, manipulation, and erasure. She was 34 years old, a devoted nurse, a loving daughter, a caring sister, a mother of 3, and she was expecting her 4th child. On the evening she died, she was making ordinary plans for the next morning. She had every reason to believe she had a future. For more than 2 decades, the man who killed her controlled what the world, and even her own children, believed about her. The jury reached the right verdict before Debbie's body was ever found. When investigators finally discovered her remains, they didn't create a new truth. They confirmed the one that had been there all along. And in the end, Andrew's final attempt to hide the truth became the very reason it was uncovered. For Debbie's family, and especially for her mother, who spent her final years refusing to stop searching for answers. Justice came heartbreakingly late, but at last, the truth could no longer be buried.
Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to share, and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories. We'll see you in the next investigate.